when we talk about renewable energy in Africa, we are talking about sizing this energy and then also situating where this energy is from. So when I looked at that map, for some reason, Africa was grayed out. When I really looked at I think the metadata, it was something along the lines of no data availability for all 54 African countries. I was like, I mean, I don't know all the countries, but I'm pretty sure you can get this
One.
information.
We are up. Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the GeoHabari podcast. I'm your host, Yariwo Kitio, and I'm pretty excited about this new episode. I'd like to think of this conversation as a build-up from the COP28 conference, which was really the first time we ever had a global stock take of world nations towards combating climate change. So this is not just timely, but a very significant conversation to just understand Africa's renewable energy landscape, the intersection of data, tech, and policy, but also the behind the scenes of what goes on to power up research and project implementation using geospatial data. We aim to unpack this landscape basically in terms of renewable energy. But before we get into the conversation, I'll have our guest introduce herself. Hi, Dolphine, and then we'll jump right into the episode.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to this wonderful podcast. And I may say this is such an amazing work that you have.
And it's a very good way of disseminating some of the information that we have in GIS to the rest of the world. So, really good job on that.
Oh, thank you.
So my name is Dolphine Mongina. I am a senior location analytics at Dalberg Research, where the focus is on trying to answer some of the specific questions in health, education, and renewable energy, as you put it, using geospatial data. I am within the team of location analyst expert, and I'm again pretty happy to be here.
Thanks, Dolphine. I think for a start, do you remember how you first got into the geospatial space and then your transition into what you're now doing at Dalberg?
I do have a background in GIS and remote sensing. I first interacted with GIS, I think, back in 2014 at JQuat, where I did my undergraduate studies. And then I went into the workforce around 2019 after graduation. And then basically, the workforce introduced me to some of the aspects that you can focus on when you're doing GIS. So you do GIS for health, you do GIS for education, you do GIS for renewable energy. So that's really what got me into that space and got me excited about some of the limits that GIS can do. With that inspiration, I went back to do my masters. I have completed my masters, just currently focusing on my project as of now. But it was not really my first choice. It was not like love at first sight when it comes to GIS. I think it was just one of those things that an African child with African parents, of course, the expectation is for you to either do engineering or medicine. At the time, I was interested in doing something along the lines of arts, but it was just not an option for me. So I fell in love with GIS along the way.
Then what was your entryway into like using GIS to power up research?
I think there was a map that I saw somewhere. It was a global map that was trying to estimate the renewable potential around the world. So when I looked at that map, for some reason, Africa was grayed out. So when I really looked at I think the metadata, it was something along the lines of no data availability for all 54 African countries. I was like, I mean, I don't know all the countries, but I'm pretty sure you can get this information for Kenya.
Yeah.
With that particular conviction, I then decided, you know what, let's now focus on trying to tell this story, this particular amazing story that, somehow Africa is left out. So then that's how the conversation around trying to size and situate renewable potential in Africa came about.
And I like that angle that you brought out, Dolphin, on like a grayed out map when you're looking at like the global renewable energy potential. Why do you think this conversation is very important when you're talking about renewable energy and Africa's landscape?
Yeah, I think we really need to talk about it at this point because number one, when you look at the renewable energy potential across the world and do like a rating, Africa seems to be on top of that. So when you compare it with other continents, we are actually on top. And yet, when you look at our accessibility to energy, it's among the lowest. So you wonder why can't we then just put this potential into use and do the uptake of that renewable energy, so that number one, we not only suffer from very low accessibility to energy, which by the way affects almost all the sectors. You don't have energy, you don't have access to health, therefore you don't have any great health outcomes, you do not have access to information. So if you really look at it, it's not about connectivity to electricity, but it's the after effects that come with that particular connectivity.
And so when you look at the data, Africa as a continent emits the lowest amount of carbon emissions. And yet, when you look at the devastating effects of climate change, they will hit the agricultural sector. And the agricultural sector drives most of our economy in Africa. So then it made economic sense, it made environmental sense to now try to look at alternative ways in which we can reduce our carbon footprint, as well as bring benefits that result into that, such as economic benefit to the people of Africa.
When we say Africa is on top of the renewable energy rank, what does that really mean?
Okay, so when you look at the energy, how we divide that is in terms of the theoretical potential of renewable energy and the practical potential of renewable energy. So practical potential speaks more about the actual energy that you would get if you erect a wind turbine or mount a solar panel in a specific area. So the practical energy actually accounts for the efficiency of the different technologies, whether solar or wind. But the theoretical potential just looks at an ideal situation without accounting for efficiency of a wind turbine or a solar panel, or assuming that it's an ideal technology, then this is the amount of energy we are likely to get. So the practical renewable energy potential is what we are really interested about. And that just speaks to the available natural resources that we have. So accessibility is now another thing that we need to like now really talk about for us to actually convert this practical energy into actual energy that can be used.
And then the good thing about Africa, I like to say that it's geographically favored in the sense that we do not have those extreme seasons whereby if you then invest in a solar plant, you have to think of ways in which you have to back up this energy for when, you have winter seasons. So that's not the case for Africa. So it is actually promised throughout the year. So if you look at a graph of the seasonality, where on the y-axis, you're basically looking at it in terms of the solar irradiation, and then on the x-axis, you're looking at it in terms of the time, so all the months throughout the year. So if you compare a continent like Africa to something like Europe, you will see that Africa has a fairly straight line, indicating that there is no variations in terms of the amount of solar energy that you are receiving. While in Europe, for countries like Germany, for instance, you see spikes in the sense that during the summer, of course, this solar is concentrated, but in the winter, you don't get the same amount. So not only are we saying that we have the potential to power the world 50 times over, but we're also saying that we can guarantee this energy throughout the year.
And within this particular project, what would you say is the key role of data in understanding and unlocking some of these insights? And then we can get to the specifics of this energy project and the data sets you used.
Sure. One thing I like about GIS is that it's the science of where, right? So when we talk about renewable energy in Africa, we are talking about sizing this energy and then also situating where this energy is from. When you talk about Kenya, for instance, Kenya has a renewable energy potential associated with solar of about 20 to 25,000 terawatt hour. But when you talk about this amount of energy, I would want to know, okay, where is this energy in Kenya? If you then integrate the use of data, the use of GIS into understanding that number and breaking it down, then you're able to look at Kenya in a different light and see, oh, so when you talk about renewable energy potential, you are sending me towards maybe the northeastern parts of Kenya where I can actually realize this potential. With GIS, it gives you the luxury to situate what you've already sized in terms of renewable energy potential.
And so when we say, for example, the solar energy for Kenya and the potential is at like 20 to 25,000 terawatt, what does that mean when you talk about connectivity? For example, in Kenya or in Turkana, roughly what does that mean in terms of people who would be connected?
Okay, so allow me to just shift the gear a bit and then talk about it in a global landscape as opposed to like a country specific example. So, if you look at our global demand just for electricity, it sits between 19,000 to around 20,000 terawatt hour per year. That's our global demand when it comes to electricity, just electricity, not energy.
I'm hearing like it's terawatt hour.
Yeah, if you look at the potential, we have a temporal aspect to potential. So we say terawatt hour per year.
We are looking at all the hours in a year, and then the unit for energy, of course, is terawatt. So then, if you break it down and say how much energy am I going to get per hour, then that becomes terawatt hour per year. So then that's what you're going to get, and then what you're also going to consume per hour.
Does it make sense?
Totally, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at it in terms of like the global scale, our global demand for electricity is about 19 to 20,000 terawatt hour. So, but when you look at it in terms of the actual potential that Africa has, when it comes to solar alone, not wind, just solar, the potential is at about 1.4 million terawatt hour of energy, which means that if you just look at it in terms of electricity alone, Africa has the potential to power the world 50 times over because our global demand is around 19 to 20,000. You're talking about potential in Africa, it's about 1.4 million terawatt hour. So, just to give you context for that, when you look at Kenya, for instance, the solar potential sits at about 20 to 25,000 terawatt hour. So, even if you say, let's just use the renewable energy potential in Kenya to power the world, it can actually support that. So I think when we talk about energy, it's very useful for us to bring that down and to like sort of break it down into bites pieces. So then it makes sense for us to actually contextualize these numbers. Of course, when you talk about providing those numbers, Africa is not going to power the world 50 times over because that would then assume, you get rid of all the other energy resources. So then that now takes us
Yeah.
to the next steps, or rather the next objective of the project that we had, where we say, okay, we have this amount of energy that can power the world 50 times over, but we're not going to do that. What can we then do with this amount of energy that will, number one, ensure that in Africa we improve the livelihoods of the African people, and then number two, we also reduce our global footprint. And mind you, when we're talking about Africa's role when it comes to renewable energy and climate change mitigation, we emit the lowest amount of carbon emissions when you compare it to the rest of the world. But then again, when you look at the effects of climate change, one thing it's going to hit hard is the agricultural sector. And the agricultural sector is the backbone of our economy. So it's a very unfair situation that Africa is placed, where we don't contribute a lot to the global emissions, and yet the effects of climate change are going to hit us the most.
Thanks, Dolphine. Wow. And like the way you're breaking it down for us just gives us so much context into what we really mean when you're talking about this renewable energy potential across the continent. So maybe we can start with what's the main insight you are looking to unlock, and then how did you approach it from a geospatial perspective in terms of data?
Yes. So GIS in this particular analysis played a very key role. So when we talk about the 1.4 million terawatt hour of solar energy per year in Africa, we want to understand where exactly is this energy. So let me take you to Kenya. So the potential for Kenya sits at about 20 to 25,000 terawatt hour per year. So then, if you tell this to an investor, they would then be interested in saying, okay, fine, where do I go for me to realize this potential that you're talking about? So GIS comes in to situate where this energy comes from, and then now gives you like a heat map, basically showing by intensity where this solar energy is, so that as an investor, when you're thinking of return on your initial investment, of course you then want to go to invest in an ideal place. So then GIS is, since it's the science of where, it basically now tells us where it is.
Maybe we can speak to how do you go about linking in data and indicators to inform stakeholders or investors, as you so put it, to get a return on investment or to know where to go to sort of harvest this potential as well.
Yeah. I think that's a very good question, May. And it also brings about the aspect of, as GIS analysts, you can't just work alone, right? So then you need to collaborate with other disciplines. I myself do not understand, or rather do not have that very great understanding when it comes to energy, because it's not what I majored in. But then again, an energy expert would come in and then break it down for you. So then the breakdown that he or she talks about is then what I convert to data. So then, for instance, when we are looking at solar energy potential, in terms of both sizing and situating this potential, we had to engage a solar expert and basically ask them, okay, what's the criteria we should look out for when it comes to modeling suitable places for mounting solar panels? And then one of the things they said is that if you're looking at it in terms of a large scale farm, then you probably need a lot of space, right? So then what does space translate to when you think about spatial data? So I think about land use, land cover, because it gives you categories of the various uses within a particular area. And then I narrow down to bare land areas, because that would represent a lot of space that does not have any obstacles. So then you remove populated areas, remove built up, you remove water bodies, and then you're left with just the bare land. And then something else that's also crucial when it comes to modeling of solar energy is, of course, the amount of raw energy that you receive from the sun. So then when you look at this particular data set, the global horizontal irradiance, it gives you the amount of solar energy received per kilometer squared. So then the unit becomes kilowatt hour per kilometer squared. So then we are very interested in trying to understand the cutoff value. So the cutoff value is important in the sense that it sort of guarantees you the amount of energy that you would get. So remember this, we are talking about billions of shillings in investment, right? So then we need to be very specific. We need to sort of guarantee that this amount of money that you're going to spend and invest in solar energy, you're going to get returns on it, right? So then we really need to come up with that particular figure that ensures that, this amount of solar energy that you promise, if you say, like, for instance, in Kenya, um 20 to 25,000 terawatt hour, if you go mount a solar panel in that place, then you get that amount of energy that was promised, right? So then I think this conversation, alongside with, basically understanding how energy is calculated, really formed the basis of us now translating it to actual data sets that we can then use to have this suitability model within a GIS environment.
So now you've mentioned the data sets and how they translate into indicators that you're using into the suitability model. Are you able to talk about the approach? Now you have the data, right? How do you go about in terms of the tooling, just briefly, what comes in to build that model?
Yes, and my lecturers are going to kill me for this, but we used something that is called suitability modeling within a GIS environment. So a suitability analysis basically gives you that sweet spot based on a number of variables, right? So we've talked about, we needed places that had bare land, we needed places that had the right amount of energy to guarantee return on investments. Also, something that we needed to do is that we needed to also maintain our identity as Africa. Africa is very blessed when it comes to its biodiversity. So then we needed to keep off protected areas. So then with a suitability analysis, you're able to define a criteria, and then the model will give you that one sweet spot that checks all these boxes that you've defined.
Thank you. I think the other thing that I'm really curious about, and I know the audience is also curious, are you able to sort of talk about some of the findings where maybe you're looking at the map and you are like, oh, this is unexpected, or oh, wow, this is actually what I was expecting from this model?
Yes, and allow me to talk about it with reference to Kenya. So, in Kenya, one of the surprising things that we came to learn with the model is that we did not see any suitable areas when it comes to solar energy along the coast. I mean, we all know that the coast is pretty hot,
Yeah.
right? But then the model just told us, yeah, it's hot, but it's not hot enough, right? And so it was a bit of a heartbreak, because the coast is very critical when it comes to having a business case for renewable energy potential, in the sense that that's where the port is located, right? So if you're thinking about using this renewable energy for anything that needs exporting, then it would make business sense for you to locate this within the coast near the port, right?
Then we were like, okay, but we do have the offshore wind. Can we then set up like wind turbines within the coast, and then they can now do the generation for us. We're like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, that can happen. So I think once we realize that aspect of, in my mind, this is what I'm expecting, but the data says other. So then I think the cost was one thing that really surprised me when it comes to not having enough solar energy to power a very large scale renewable energy production farm. So again, I'm not saying that you can't set up a solar along the coast. Of course you can, but when you look at the size of what we were considering, which is significantly higher, we just were not able to get the sufficient amount of solar energy to support that. So then that's why we opted for offshore wind for the production of renewable energy.
Something that was also pretty much obvious was the fact that our model also highlighted areas near Lake Turkana as suitable. So as we all know, we do have a wind farm in Lake Turkana. So then the fact that our model also said that, this place is suitable, it only cemented our initial thinking, in the sense that that was in itself a benchmark or a sense check to ensure that whatever we are getting from our model is actually what is on the ground, what is depicted on the ground.
Other places that we were really keen on looking at was around the northeastern parts of Kenya. So the northeastern parts of Kenya checks all the boxes that we were keen on looking at, except for the accessibility to infrastructure, right? We still do not have very good roads there, and transmission lines and everything else. But the important thing is that it actually has the amount of energy that we need. So then when we're looking at these parts of Kenya, we were looking at it in terms of like the what if scenario, the future scenario. So we were saying, okay, fine. When modeling for the northeastern parts of Kenya, we are going to get rid of accessibility to infrastructure. So we are only going to consider the availability of bare land. We're also going to consider the raw energy from the sun. So that is available. But when you look at infrastructure, I mean, the roads can always be built, right? Transmission lines can always be built. So with that what if scenario, with that future scenario where we are saying, you know what, in the northeastern parts of Kenya, if you build roads, if you build transmission lines, then this is the amount of energy you're likely going to get. So it's like a bait where we say, you're going to get this, but you need to set up this first, right? Because when you look at the coast, I mean, it has everything else, but it does not have the natural solar, which is something that if you don't have solar, you don't have solar. But if you don't have roads, transmission lines, you can always build that, as long as you have the sufficient amount of energy to do that production. So on the insights, the very last thing that we really needed to consider is that sometimes as techies, you really work from behind your laptop. You trust the data to do the modeling for you. Trust that if the model says this is a suitable place to set up a solar plant, then it is a suitable place to set up a solar plant. But we need to do something that is called ground truthing, because remember, we are building a case for investors who are going to invest billions of shillings into this particular project. So then we need to have that certainty that if we tell you this is where the solar energy is, then this is actually where it is. So then we had to incorporate that aspect of ground truthing, because maybe you might have used land use land cover data set that is for 2020, and then maybe in 2021 something happened that was not captured in that data set. So then what else do you do? Because you don't want that realization to come at a point where the investors are getting ready to actually go and set it up there. So the aspect of ground truthing really is a very good way of supplementing GIS analysis. Experts were able to verify that in some locations where we identified as suitable, most of them actually came out to be true, in the sense that our model was fairly accurate when it comes to the prediction of these suitable locations.
In terms of communicating this to the stakeholders, of course, we leave out the modeling part. That's for techies. And then we just talk about this energy, because I think one of the critical questions they ask is the so what component, right? In the sense that you're telling me in Kenya we have this amount of energy, then so what, right? And then something else is that, you have to communicate in a way that it makes business sense to them, right? So if you're talking about a use case of using renewable energy for hydrogen production with an aim of exporting it, then they would want to focus on coastal areas, because an investor is not going to invest in a product and then spend a lot of time and not get the amount of money that they invested in, right?
Yeah.
They're looking at it in terms of profits. So then if you talk about hydrogen production potential with the name of exporting it, then you're not going to look at it in terms of inland production, if I may say, because inland production, you also have to think about, okay, fine, how then do I export it from inland to the coast for export? That's not something that an investor would be interested in. They'll be like, okay, fine, that's good, but I'm not going to invest in hydrogen with the name of exporting it if it's going to be within the country. Do you have a use case for along the coast? So basically, it was trying to just shape it in a way that resonates with them, that makes sense to them. So then the investors that we were keen on were those that, had export in mind, right? So anything that you would communicate to them within a country, then the country needed to have a coastline, needed to have a port, and then it also needed to have this thing that we call ease of doing business. How easy or difficult is it to do business? So then that's where we talk about policies, because they would ask you, okay, fine, how easy is it for me to then come into your country and produce it? Because I am not going to be stuck in the long permitting times. I'm not going to be stuck in frustrations. I just need something that, is easy for me to do. So then, yeah.
The second point you've touched on, and I don't know if you're able to expound on that, on sometimes it's not just the technical and the data, these policies as well. Are you able to talk about the gaps we have across the continent in terms of policy and what this means when it comes to implementation? And I don't know if you have some examples on countries that are maybe doing better in terms of policy to attract such investors, and maybe just speak to these gaps in policy that inhibit investments or even potential innovations across the continent.
Yeah, and I really like your line of questioning, by the way. You ask the difficult questions. I mean, it's a very sad story. Because if you look at the ranking when it comes to, okay, fine, the potential that we talk about in Africa, some of the countries emerge on top, right? But then if you look at a combination of, do I have the energy, do I have the policies to support renewable energy adoption, or rather the use? How easy is it to do business? Then sadly, some of the countries with high performing potential energy are no longer on the top, right? What if these countries that have very high energy potential also had these policies to support that? I mean, we could discover endless possibilities with this amount of energy. I think with specific examples, when it comes to policies, that's where now you start analyzing Africa as individual countries. Because remember, when we're doing the modeling bit, we're doing it at the continent level because everything else is straightforward. But when you now start looking at the policies and now translating this renewable energy into exploitable energy, then you have to look at the countries in Africa as individual countries, because the policies that we have vary across different geographies, different countries, right? So then a good country that I can think of, which was able to quickly realize this energy potential, is Namibia. So Namibia has very good potential, both in terms of solar and wind. And so they were quick to think and say, how can we best put this energy into use? And so hydrogen production potential came into play, right? So then they decided to produce green hydrogen using their renewable energy potential and then export this energy to other countries that have very energy intensive sectors and economies. And so with that particular aspect, it was very easy for them to do that because they have these policies that support that. It's pretty easy to do business in Namibia and to realize this potential. And so you not only look at it in terms of how they are able to then crack this code, but then how those efforts now translates to the local economy. Because with the hydrogen production in Namibia by a company called Hyphen, they're able to not only reduce their carbon footprint, but they're also able to create jobs for Namibians, right? If we come back to Kenya, the country is trying, yes, but we've not yet reached to that point where we can comfortably say that our policies allow for investors to come in and do their business. Because an investor will just have one question: how easy is it to do business, and how quick am I going to have the returns on my investments? And so, I mean, if the process is just too hard and it doesn't make sense, then they just simply pack their bags and go to the next country where it's easier to do business. When it comes to the policies, I mean, we really need to collaborate with government and the relevant stakeholders so that we can just tell them that, look at what this energy can do to us as an economy. And, this is what is preventing us from reaching our goal. because the policies, as I see, are huge obstacles when it comes to now actually realizing what we have analyzed to now actual use case potential.
Thanks, Dolphine. Thank you for painting that very clearly. Within this project, when you're doing this research to support these use cases for the stakeholders and investors within this scenario, are there particular resources that were very useful in helping you manage this project?
I'll give credit where credit is due. So, IRENA, for one, has done extensive research when it comes to just modeling and trying to estimate the solar and wind potential in all countries in Africa, actually. And so, IRENA was our go-to resource in terms of just trying to ensure that the numbers that we are seeing actually make sense. So then we were able to benchmark what we got from our analysis to what IRENA had. Then in terms of the actual raw resources that we receive from the sun, that's the global horizontal irradiance. Global Solar Atlas has done an amazing work in terms of just modeling this at the global level. It's 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer roughly at the equator. It's a pretty good data set. And then when it comes to wind, we have the wind speeds again modeled at 100 meters above sea level. And then the wind speeds are in meters per second, also 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. So again, a huge thank you to the Global Solar Atlas, the Global Wind Atlas, for providing such amazing data sets that we can use for endless possibilities. And then, of course, when you look at the topography, you look at the land use, land cover, you look at the protected areas, the Global Forest Watch does this. The Global Resource Watch, which is in charge of just looking at our planet's pulse, also has the relevant data sets that really help when it comes to the analysis that we did. And of course, the experts that we have with regard to solar energy, wind energy, geothermal, hydro, when it comes to hydrogen modeling. Yeah, so it's a long list of resources, but those are the things that I can think of on top of mind.
I would be doing the audience injustice if I didn't ask this question. What are you looking forward to in terms of our energy landscape, basically?
In terms of resources, we've already established that we have the enough resources to power the world 50 times over. I would like the future to look like is also have policies that support the actual realization of this energy. So then if you talk about actual realization of this renewable energy potential, we could be talking about some of the developed countries in Africa.
Thank you. Wow. That was very powerful. I'm going to shift the gears a bit and talk about the power of networking and the power of getting your research out there as researchers, as technical people. And so last year, Dolphine, you were part of the ESOMA conference. Are you able to sort of talk about what this was about and any opportunities that are open currently that the audience can sort of participate in to elevate their research and get their voices out there?
Yes, and I must say that, looking back at and reflecting upon my career journey, I don't think I could have been at this point without the networks that, I've come to interact with along the way. So it's really, really useful. With regard to ESOMA, so ESOMA brings together researchers from around the globe to just talk about some of the amazing work that they've done within different disciplines. So last year we did have the privilege of taking the stage in Amsterdam, where we basically talked about the power of GIS when it comes to the agricultural sector in Africa. And so that garnered a lot of, positive feedback from the audience, and they were very interested in knowing if, the same thing can be scaled across the globe, right? And so that got me thinking that in Kenya or in Africa, there are a lot of researchers who are doing amazing work, but they do not have the global platform to present this work and talk about it. And so my humble request to you is to basically apply to be a speaker. And then once you do that, you not only get the opportunity to go to Greece and present your work in a global platform, but you also get to publish this amazing work that you've done. And trust you me, that comes with a lot of positive reactions, a lot of networks, and a lot of business, if I may say.
Thanks, Dolphine. And I totally agree with that. I think networking is one of the most powerful tools that we can use to sort of elevate and get our work out there to be heard, basically. And so thanks, Dolphine, for that. I will share all the resources that Dolphine has talked about from all the data sets she used, and also now the ESOMA conference, and Dolphine would also be able to support with that in case you'd want to submit and you are stuck.
Yes, because the amazing thing is also I sit at the committee. So if you just need any tips on, how to present a paper that is, or rather an abstract that is has a high probability of being selected, then yes, I can definitely help with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Guys, I'll share all these resources in the podcast description like I always do. But thank you so much for listening in, Dolphine. I'm very grateful. You've literally taken us on a learning journey. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that. And we look forward to having more conversations with you. We'll definitely call you back.
Thank you so much. And I must again just stress on the fact that the work that you're doing towards this podcast is really, really amazing, and I'm looking forward to some of the milestones that you'll achieve with this podcast. I'll be right here to just clap for you. If you need my audience any time of day at 3 a.m., just call me and I'll be able to help.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dolphine. Thank you. So guys, yeah, until next time, interact with us on social media. We'll put a poll as usual on Spotify for this particular episode. But until the next episode, that's bye from Dolphine and I. Bye.
Bye.